Okay. Okay. Okay, so please, are we ready? Okay. So we'll start with HTML. What is HTML? It's basically the standard through which web pages are structured and written and built. Okay. So we'll try to understand what is an HTML document, what is the structure of the document, and the syntax of the document. The syntax is basically how it is written. Okay. Then we will see semantically what the components of an HTML represent. We will explore the correct way to structure a web page and the contents within a web page. And well, maybe we can talk by the end an overview of what HTML5 represents. Okay. So as I told you before, once again, we always start from this slide. And in this slide, if you have to guess where is the topic that we will, where is HTML? Where do we say HTML is? In the front end, no? So it is here. So now in this part of the course, we are stepped here, starting from this HTML. So always in the front end, this is what we have seen before. The front end, what it does, what are the languages there. And I think we are all familiar with HTML, I hope so. Do we all have some kind of knowledge of what HTML is, or is the first time that you see like something like this? First time, okay. Okay. Fine, it's perfect, no worries on that. If I show you this snippet, what can you infer from this snippet? What can you say from that? Is? It's a sample page, yeah. What else?
For every part that we have to implement, we have to use those slash thing, like one without the slash, one with the slash.
Okay, yeah, so we can somehow infer that here we open tags, we have opening tags, and then we have closing tags, no? That we open, for instance, the head, and then we close the head. And somehow by looking at how they are formatted, we see that they are, there is like a tree structure in here, no? Okay. What do you think the second line, in the second line, what does that tag represent? The language. So it is declaring that the document has a language, or the content of that document is written in a specific language. That in this case we can say it is English. Okay. What do you think is the difference between the title and the H1? Do you have any guess on that? The header is the H1, you say, and the title. Yeah, but in the display, what do you think it changes?
Well, the title is the bigger one, and we can have multiple headers on there.
Okay. Maybe that might be the sense that maybe the title is more visible or somehow more, and the other one is maybe like a smaller one, maybe. Okay. What do you think the P stands for? Paragraph. Okay. Okay. Yeah, basically, first of all, we can observe here that there are nested components, no? So if you see look at the syntax, there are components within other components, okay? So the first tag that we always have to write is the first line there. That is the one through which we declare that document corresponds to an HTML document, okay? And this is the standard syntax, and it's always in this way, and we always write it in this way, okay? So it is always a copy-paste. It should always be the first line in an HTML document before the HTML tag, okay? So it is just a declaration to say that the document we are going to write down is an HTML document. Then we have the HTML tag, that is the root element of an HTML document, okay? So we open the HTML, as you can see there in the second line we open it, and in the last line we have closed the HTML document. Within that first tag we have the language metadata, indicating that the component, that the content within that document is written in that language. Why do you think it is important to indicate the component of the contents within? Or
So maybe when it's online on the website, there are like translation extensions.
Sure.
That would help it.
Sure. It is basically metadata, so it is information you are giving to a browser or to services such as Google or services such as search services, so that they know that the content of your page is written in that language. Does it mean that if you automatically write that language English, then all of the component, all of the information will magically be written in English? No. No. It is something that we declare. It is an information, metadata that we give to the browser or to the search engines, so that they can offer services based on our language, okay? So it is for browsers, search engines, and other tools, like the ones you say, like spell checking, translation, and those kind of stuff. Then we have the head, okay? Do you see that the first block corresponds to the head and the second block corresponds to the body? So, yeah, when we see the title, the instinct that we might have, or the perception that we might have, is that it is being shown big, like a big title somewhere in the page. But the reality is that it contains meta information. So it's not something that's going to be visible, but it is meta information, information of the website, okay? So this, we will look at in an example, but this title is not going to be displayed within the web page, but is the title that you see when you open the browser, for instance, or in the window, okay? So it's meta information. What you write there is not something visually displaying on the website. Up to now, we will say that in the head, we will just have the title, but then we will see that also in the head, we will declare link to other scripts. So for instance, when we will use Bootstrap, the reference to the Bootstrap library will be added within the head. Okay, the title sets the web page's title that is shown in the browser tab or in the window. Then we have the body that contains all of the content that in this case is not metadata, but it's the content that in fact is visible to the users, no? The H1 represents a top level heading, like the biggest heading that we might add into a website. And it is used for main titles. Then we have the P that, as you could infer, is the paragraph of text. Okay. Okay, so as I told you last time, it's kind of boring to reason on this based on the slide. So let's try to write it and see how it works in code, okay? So here we have Visual Studio. I think all of you know Visual Studio or have, I don't know. Do you all know Visual Studio? Is anyone not familiar with Visual Studio Code? Okay, it is a very simple development environment. If any of you haven't still downloaded it, you can download from, you can write VS Code. No, not this one. This one, code.visualstudio.com. It is an open source code editor. This one is built or implemented by Microsoft. And installing it is super simple. You just have to download the installer, run it, and it is done. You don't have to configure anything else, and it is kind of a lightweight code editor. And Visual Studio looks like this. So here in the sidebar, we have like all of the files, all of the folders we're dealing with, and here we will have like the code editor with the documents, and that's the space where we can edit the documents. So here I built this exercises folder, and I wrote this subfolder called HTML. So first of all, how do I start building an HTML file? I create a new file, right? Okay. How do we call this one? Let's call this one test. And what's the extension of this file? HTML. Okay, so here I have an empty file. I have declared that it has the extension HTML, but up to now it is an empty file. Okay, what was the first tag that I was supposed to add here? You tell me. This one, no? So I opened the tag. Did you see that I opened the tag? And then there is doc type and HTML. Yeah.
Why does this seem like the only tag which does not have a closing? Like every other tag has a slash, or like you can have a singular tag with a slash.
Sure.
Arrow tags, but this one doesn't.
This is a very good question, and it is because this tag, this doc type, is like a declaration. It's something that has been included like in HTML5, and it is a declaration to indicate that that document has HTML and it is for metadata purposes, so that the browsers and all the browser can understand that the format and the content that is there is compliant with HTML5. Okay, so it is like a different kind of. It doesn't belong to a tree structure of the other components, but it is kind of a declaration. But it's the only one that we will use. Okay. I don't like to say it is a declaration, because then maybe you can get the idea that we can declare variables or something like this here. So it's not that kind of declaration, but it's a declaration just to indicate that the content in there is compliant with HTML5. Okay. Then after this, what's the root element? HTML. Okay, and did you see that when I wrote the HTML tag, Visual Studio Code automatically closes the tag? So we already know that everything that we will write within the HTML tags will all be part of the content of the page. And here we had two things, no? Like two big elements. Is this big enough, or better like this? Okay. And we had two elements there, no? One was the head, and the other one was the body. Okay. So let's start with the head. Okay, there is something that might seem stupid, but it's super important. And it's this, okay? So as an advice for you, so that you don't struggle with the implementation, I mean, now we're doing a very silly document. But when it gets bigger and when it gets more components and the code starts to grow up, if the code is not formatted, it is a nightmare because you don't understand anything, or maybe you forget a tag and you don't know why the browser is not displaying the things as you are expecting it to display them. So please, please, please always format the code, okay? What does format the code means in this case? It means to align all of the start of the lines based on the levels within the nested tree. Okay. So as you can observe there, if I ask you to tell me what is happening on the first snippet, it's super difficult to understand what's happening there. If instead of that, I ask you what is happening in the second snippet, even if you don't know what those tags means, somehow you can get an idea of at least what's the hierarchy there and what are the levels there. So please always format the code. And to format the code in Mac, it works with Shift Option F, and in Windows, it should work with Shift Alt F. So try and let's see if it works. Okay, up to now, since I don't have anything, it will display in this way. Perfect. What do we have in the head?
Sorry, you don't have the visual code yet.
Ah, I'm sorry. Yeah, always tell me that because I don't know. Okay, thank you. What do we have here? The title. Ah, indeed, we were forgetting something. In the HTML, did you remember that there was the language? Okay. Okay. So for instance, like this, no? I declare that the language is going to be Spanish, and then I write the content in Spanish, of course. As you see, it is not something automatically that if I write the Spanish, then it will write the, no, it's something that I'm declaring to give a hint to the browser or to the search engines so that they can know that the content that I wrote there in my page, it is written in Spanish. And then in the body, I wrote a message, welcome, okay? Okay, it doesn't say anything important, it's just like welcome and this is my site, okay? Did we have something else in the example? No. Okay, so this is basically what we had in the snippet. So up to now, we can say that we created an HTML document, we declared that it was an HTML document, we opened the tags, and we followed like the same structure and the same syntax. Now, how do we open this document? How do we deal with this document? In practice, what it is? Because of course, here we have the code, but then we have to open it in the browser, okay? So here we have our test.html. Since it is an HTML file, by default, when I open it, it will open in Safari or the browser that I have by default. So when I click it, it is super disappointing because it's a very ugly document that doesn't have anything. No, it is just like a bigger text, a smaller text, and that's all. But based on this, we can try to understand or see some things. So for instance, the H1 makes this big title, okay? And the paragraph looks like this, okay? It's the only two components we have. What happened with the title? So you can't see that, but I swear that here it says Hola amigos. That was the title that I wrote for the application. So at the end, the title is visible or makes sense at this point. So it's not visible on the website. It's not a graphical component in the website, but it's something that defines the title of the page on the browser. Okay? Up to now, is it clear? Did it work for all of you? No, it's super easy. Here I have the file that is the test.html, and since it is an HTML document, when you open, by default it will open on your default browser in the computer. So you click and it's all. Okay. But now that you ask, okay, it would be kind of boring that on each change that you do on the HTML, you have to open the Finder and then open the file. So there is an extension, like a plugin for Visual Studio Code, that enables us to show on the one side a live preview of the website, and on the other side, like the code. So that we can be working on the code and immediately see within the development environment how the code is going to look. Okay, and this extension is called Live Preview. And it basically works like this, that I can write the code on this side of the page, and on the right side of the page, it shows me a live preview of how it is being implemented. So how do we install extensions in Visual Studio Code? We install them here. Do you see these boxes here? You click there, and here you look in the search field, you look for live preview, and it is this one. It is also implemented by Microsoft, and since I already have it installed in my computer, it shows me disable and uninstall. But if it were not already installed, here you should see like install or add extension, something like that. So please, if you want, try right now to implement it, to install it. Okay. And what it happens once the extension is installed is that here you will see this icon, okay, with the zoom lens. And when I click it, it will show me the website directly within the editor. And when I make changes, it updates automatically here. So it is very practical to work in this way, because you can see how the changes are having an impact directly there without having to save the document and then opening from the browser. Because in the browser you can just see the document, but here you can edit the document and see the code next to the final version. Does it work for all of you? Okay. Up to now, do we have any questions? Is everything clear? Nice. Okay, within an HTML document, you can also create a comment. So a comment is, well, as in code, something that is not going to execute, but it has just the purpose to indicate something or to add some information within the code, but knowing that it's code that is not going to be executable. The syntax to add a comment is this one. You open the tag, then you have the that character, the dashes, and then within that structure you write the component. Okay. With this specific tag that is called the A tag, you can create a link. What is a link in the context of a website? Something you click on and redirects you to a different page, right? So it creates a hyperlink where the href specifies the target URL, in this case, demo.html. In this case, okay, works the same. It opens with A and it closes with /A, as you can see here. How do you think this will look like? I mean, this paragraph, how it will change by adding this A tag? It will have a link, okay? And how is the link? What's going to be the link? What's the content of the link, let's say? You will see a piece of text, like in a different color or something like that, that might give you a hint that you can click on that. And that piece of text that will be linkable will be simple, right? Because you see that simple is the portion of text that is within these tags, within the A tags. No? So the inner text here of the link is simple. The end tag is always /A. And as you can see here, both in this property, in HTML it works like pairs, no? A pairs with a key value. So in here we had a key value to specify the language. No? So the language is English. Here we have another key value to specify that the link or the reference that we are referencing to is this page. So it is always the key that is a specific word, a specific attribute, and the value of that attribute. So it always works name value pairs. And let's see it in practice. Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, so here we have two paragraphs, and we want to make this word link a paragraph, no? That it works, that when I click it, it takes me to a different page. Okay, so here what happened? I enclose this link within the two A tags, okay? But as you can see here, nothing happens. Why does nothing happens? Because we are missing we're not indicating what's the reference or the page that we are trying to link here. So here we wrote this property href, and here we are supposed to indicate what's the page we are trying to link to. So if I click, nothing happens. If I click here, what will happen? It says that such file doesn't exist because there is not such a thing as demo.html in the same folder as this file. Because we also have to have in mind that fact, that in order to be able to find that file, it must be within the same folder and with the specified name. Okay? However, if, for instance, here, instead of linking to a local file, to a local HTML, I'm linking to a remote website, no? To a URL of a remote website. So by clicking here, it took me to the Politos website, okay? So that reference, that element also works not just to link local files or files built by myself, but it can also link to external files, to remote URLs or to remote websites, okay? So in here, what do we have to do in order to make this work? To create a new file that must be called demo.html, okay? Then for the demo.html, we can copy paste everything because now that the structure is the same, that the tags that we will be using are probably the same. And here we can say here we are in the demo page, and I'm trying to write a silly page, so with nothing very different from what we have seen before. And in that page, I want a link to get back to the home page, let's call that. So how do I create that link? Exactly in the same way, just that in this case, instead of pointing at demo.html, I will be pointing at test.html. That was the previous page. Okay, so this is how the demo page, that is the second one that I've just built, looks like. And when I click here, it takes me to the welcome page. Okay, so this is very simple, very silly, but behind this there is a very powerful context, and it's like a very powerful tool, and it means that every HTML component can be linked, and that's how the web works, no? At the end, if you try to think of how all of the applications that we use work, it is basically this principle. All of them are linked resources that take us to different websites, that takes us to different pages, that retrieves different informations, and all of them are linked in this way. Okay? Okay, do you have any questions? Did it work for everyone? Any problems, issues? No? Perfect. So up to now, you can say that you already implemented your first page. Okay? Super ugly, but up to now, it's fine. Why do you think that the components within the HTML are structured in that way, like in a tree-nested way? The reason why they are structured in that way is because we want to build something, or that they wanted to, that by structuring that way, the people that designed the web, they wanted to create this document object model, no? So at the end, all of the HTML of all of the documents within the web can be represented as something like this. And what do you think is the advantage of representing the things in this way, in this hierarchically way?
I guess you can easily find an element.
Sure. Basically because of that, because you can easily navigate the elements of the page, no? Having it in this structure is much easier than if it were like a textual document, no? It's much more easy to find something in a document that is structured in this way than if it were like plain text. No? In plain text, finding a portion of the document is super difficult. Instead, if you have the tags and you have already like a structure, the contents of the page within very specific tags that are hierarchical and that respect some rules, it's super easy to find nodes within that tree. And we know that in this case, each node of the document represents a part or a portion of the HTML. And this is super useful, especially when using JavaScript, because with JavaScript, what I told you is that we can add interaction to the components, that the components can be displayed dynamically depending on some conditions and some interactions of the user. So for instance, have you seen in some pages that when you click a button, something appears or disappears? Or when you click, for instance, an image gallery, then it pops up like the images, and if you click on the next button, then it shows like the next image or the previous one. So that's JavaScript, what is going on there. No? There is this script that is running, and basically how JavaScript works is that it is listening to the actions that are being executed on the elements, and based on that actions, does some changes on the HTML. No? So the HTML becomes dynamic when you use JavaScript, and it works that it introduces or adds elements dynamically. So to add those elements dynamically and know where to add elements within the HTML structure is super useful to have this kind of representation that you can easily navigate to find where in the document you want to add something, what to add, and specifically in what portions of the document. Okay, and in the navigation it provides a way to go through all of the elements and the attributes. So here, for instance, you saw that there are like some reserved words, no? Some safe words that I've been telling you. So if you want to declare this, you write HTML. If you want to set the title, you use this reserved word that is title. If you want the language, then you have this one. But up to now, you just know the ones that I've been telling you. Or you just know which are the attributes and the options that you have, because I've been telling you. So what's the official reference to know the components that you have available on HTML? You can find them here this one is like the official documentation for HTML. No? So in here you can find like all of the elements that you have to build a website or a page. So for instance, A is the one that we have just seen, that is the anchor element, and is the element with the href attribute that creates an hyperlink to web pages, files, email addresses, locations in the same page. This site is super useful because other than having like the description of the element, it also has like examples of how it works, how it is written, and how it goes. And it also has the explanation of what the attributes within this element means. So here you have the reference of all of the elements that we have available in HTML. Up to now, we just know body. We just know the head. We already know the H1. And for instance, here in the H1, it tells us that we have from H1 to H6. And depending on the number, it writes like a different kind of heading in the site. So let's try, for instance, instead of H1, let's write H6. But this is in the demos page. So here, for instance, it changed. No? Before it was an H1, then when I set it to the header 6, you know that it changes. Okay, so up to now we don't know the most part of them because we have just started, but it's important to know that the reference page where you can find all of the documentation and all of the options you have to build a website is this one, okay? Okay, somehow the tags that we have been using up to now give us some idea of what the content represents, right? So for instance, the title tag lets us understand that the content within that tag is the title. Okay, in that case, it's kind of clear what the semantics of the content is. But for instance, with the P, we know it's a paragraph, but it's very generic. We don't know what's going there. Or with the H1, we know that it is like a heading, but we don't specifically know what information is within there. Since the last versions or the last versions of HTML, the people that is designing HTML is trying to add more semantic to the content of the HTML. Why do we want to add more semantic to the document? Because somehow adding more semantic is like a hint that we are giving always to the browsers, to the search engines, to indicate what a portion of our HTML represents, or what it is intended to represent in our website. Okay, so based on that reasoning, now we have tags such as the ones that we can see there, the article, for instance, so that the content within those tags represents an article. We will see what an article means in this case, but seeing a tag that says article gives us some sense, some semantic sense of what the content represents. Also, there is the aside. What do you think the aside might be? Something on the side of the page, no? The nav, what do you think the nav might be? What? A navigation bar, for instance. Something that helps us to navigate. There is a section. Also, now we have the header and the footer. What do you think the header is? It's like that typical portion of the website that goes in the top part, that usually occupies like the whole width of the browser, and the footer is the one that goes in the lower part of the page. Okay. So indeed, it is something like this. No? Now we have the tags to say that the content that we are writing in our HTML complies or somehow behaves more or less in this way. That what we are writing between two tags represents a portion of the site. Of course, this is not fixed. It is not that if you write footer, then the content will be displayed on the bottom of the page, because up to now the HTML doesn't have anything to do to how the page will look like. No? I mean, even if we write, for instance, right now footer or header, the page will still look ugly as it is looking right now because we haven't added any style to the page. But somehow within the document we are adding some hints, some information about what the content in there represents. So specifically, there are like 4 elements that we would like to use in this at this point. One of them is the article, that is a self-contained composition in a document that is intended to be, it is independent. It can be reusable. What does it mean reusable? It means that in a web page you can have several articles. No? It's a section that can be replied, that can be somehow replied. So for instance, if you open a newspaper website, you can see that there are like different news, and all of them have the same structure, no? Like the title, an image, and the description of the news. Or if you open, like a newsletter, it comes to my mind. It has like different repeated sections. So those repeated sections might be taken into account as an article. There is a section that is a generic piece of the page that doesn't have like a specific purpose, but it has a generic purpose, such as the ads, for instance, no? The publicity that you see on the web pages that occupies some portion of the page, and it is generically inserted there, and it doesn't have any relation with the other content in the page. So we say it is independent because semantically we want that portion of the page to be independent from the content that is being shown on the main site. Then we have the navigation, that is where we have like the top structure of the page. So the main links that take us to the different sections of the website. And then we have the aside, that is like a portion of the site that is typically on the side of the main content. But in this case, it's different from the section because the things that you can find on the site are related to the main content. No? So for instance, here we have the article, and the article might have like the header and the main content of the article. Let's suppose this is a newspaper website. So the article is a single news, with the title of the news, with the description of the news. In the aside, what we might find, it might be something like related news, no? So in that case, it's something that is related with the main content, with this. So do you want to know more about X news? Do you want to see more about this. So the site is related to the main content, to this one. What do we have in the section? The section is something generic. It can be whatever. It can be some ad. It can be some sponsor there. It can be whatever. What's the difference between the section and the site? That the section is not related to the main content. It can be, for instance, if here the news is about sports, or no, if the news is about politics, maybe the section can be an ad or whatever on clothes. So it doesn't have any relation with the main content. Here we have the navigation bar. That is where the main links of the page are visible. So if we want to navigate the page through the main structure, all of the links are here. We have the page header and the footer. Okay, the header and the footer, I think they are more clear. What do we usually find in the footer, for instance? The Sure. Typically, it's like, for instance, here in the Politecnico, if we try to identify those elements in this site, for instance, we might say that the header is, what's the header in here? I would say this part, no? This white part. Like this one, from the status servizi login up to here, I would say. What's the navigation in here? What's the nav? Yeah, maybe these links that are like the most important ones that take us like to the main sections or the main portions of the website. We might say that that's the navigation of the site. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, so for instance, well, here you can see that they tagged like the header as all of that main part, no? So the header in this case is the white part. And they and here you see that they have the nav, and the nav is the part that is enclosed. But I mean, it is the links that are enclosed there in the blue highlighted zone. So yeah, it also respects that semantic. Of course, if instead of nav here there was written like div, it would work exactly the same, no? It doesn't add any change, or it still works, it works perfectly. I mean, if you want, you can write a page, writing all of the page with divs. That is like the containers. That is the generic container. And technically, it's fine, it will work. What's the problem with that? That it doesn't have any semantic. We can't understand what that element represents. And even more problematic, we can't understand, but neither the browser can understand what it means, neither the search engines can understand what it is. So it is difficult. We are not giving the hint so that our page can be easily interpreted by machines or by machines, okay? So the good practice, and what we are going to do, is always use the semantic tags. Okay. So which one do you think is here for instance, these ones, we might say they are articles, no? Because it's section of the page that are being replied, that are the same, that keep the same structure. So we might say that these are articles. Maybe maybe this one we might say it is a section. It is because I don't know specifically in this case, but let's suppose that it is not linked with the main content or the content above it, but it is like a generic section of the page. So we can say it is a section. It is not related to what is shown up above. The footer, we all agree that is this one, no? That it also has like the main links. It has the links to download the mobile applications, the links to the social media, and yeah, the contact data that you told us before. And which one do you think here might be like an aside? Maybe, yeah. No, not this one, because this one at the end is like different articles, just that they are being displayed like in a different grid. But at the end, all of them are articles. But for instance, if we open, for instance, this news, maybe this one can be an aside, no? Because it's information related to the main content that is being displayed there, like in a different section. So all of this can be an aside. How do we identify or how do we distinguish if it is an aside or not? We must ask ourselves if that information would make sense wherever in the website or if it makes sense just here. So does that aside make sense in the main page? No, because it has the tags that concern to the news that is being shown there. Does the share with or share through has sense whatever in the website? No, it makes sense there because it's the option to share that news through the social media. Okay, so that's basically the reasoning there. Is this clear? And here I add like this flow chart. That is a flow chart that you can use to ask questions and try to identify and distinguish which elements to use depending on the semantic that you want to add to the elements. Okay, here we have some of the most common or the most important tags. Oh. Indeed, let me show you something first. Okay, I was missing this. That is super important. Okay, we already know that the HTML elements are used to define the meaning of a portion of the document. And each element in the page has a property that is called the display. Okay? And we have two kinds of values to that property. One of them is block. What does block means? That it occupies all of the width. And then there is inline. And what does it mean? That it just occupies the portion of the element, of the content. Okay. So it doesn't start a new line. It doesn't occupy all of the width, but it just occupies its portion, and the next element is being placed next to the right or to the right of the current element. It just occupies the necessary space from left to right, and the layout wraps at the end of the line. So when it reaches like the limit of the width, it goes down. That's the displaying line, and the display block, it occupies the whole width. Here you can see like the graphical illustration. So when the display is block, it occupies all of the space. When it is in line, like it just occupies its space, and when the space is over, it goes down. Okay. Why is it important? Because, for instance, the sectioning elements that we have seen before, they're block elements. They occupy the whole width. Let me show you. Indeed, what we can try right now is to add more semantic to our website. No, so we just had like the title, and we had like a heading here to say welcome and 2 paragraphs. We might say that we want our title to be within the header. And let's say that, for instance, this link is going to be in the footer of the website. Okay, as you can see here, visually, nothing changes. What I wrote is just an indication to add semantic to the page, so that when you read the code, and especially when a machine reads the code, it knows that this portion of the site represents the footer, or is information that is contained within what I call the footer, or that this information here is being displayed within a semantic component that is the header. But as you see, nothing changes. There is a generic container that, as I told you before, is called div. So if I, instead of header, write div, it works exactly the same. Okay. We will try to avoid div as much as possible. It is not forbidden to use div, but if we can add some semantic or express something through the elements that we have, we will always prefer to indicate them with semantic elements. Okay. And what I was telling you before is that what does it mean to be block or inline? How do I know that that element behaves as a block display or as an inline display? I know because, for instance, okay, step by step. Here I see the website, no? There is a tool within most of the browsers that is called like the developer tools or the inspector, no? So it maybe changes the name from browser to another, but it is always or developer tools or inspector. What you can do with the inspector is to check or to have a look at how the HTML behind that page works, how the HTML is written, and they give you, the tool gives you the possibility to navigate the elements or to visually see how the code has an impact on the visual outcome of the site, no? Since we all know that all of the web pages are written with HTML, we can inspect any website and see how the website is being structured, for instance. Of course, this HTML is much more complex than ours, but we already can distinguish that here there is a container that has an ID that is main. We can distinguish that this is a container, and we can navigate through the contents, okay? So the developer tools and inspector is super useful if we want to try to understand how a website is built. In our case, that we have this super simple HTML, we can navigate the elements. So first, do you remember we had the header there? So we have the header. When we place the mouse or when we hover this element, you can see here that it highlights the whole width of the window. So from that, we know that the display that is being used there is a block display. Even if the text just occupies like this small portion of the screen, since it is a block display, it will occupy like the whole element. So that's why then the next paragraph is not being added next to welcome, but it is being added in the next line, because the first one, that is a block, occupies everything. What happens with the paragraph? The same. No? The paragraph occupies all of the available width, and that's why the next element is below. Is it clear? It's super simple, the context, but then it will be useful. Because this is like the default behavior, but it doesn't mean that we can't change that behavior. We will then see how we can change that behavior by using CSS. But up to now, we say that this is like the default behavior. Okay, so the sectioning elements are block display. Then there are elements to group the content, such as paragraph, black quote. I won't go into each one of them, but there are, for instance, for creating lists, for creating a menu. But the important thing here, or the message that I want to convey, is that these are block elements. So it means that when you use them, you should be prepared to occupy all of the width. Indeed, let's try to use this one. That might be the most interesting one. We will use this one, that is the unordered list, okay? And you can see how it works. So did you see how this unordered list works? I open the tag, I close the tag, and within this element, it is expecting to receive elements of this type, list elements. No? If instead of UL, I write OL, what happens? It is an ordered list, a numbered list, okay? Here there is another important one, that is the main. What do you think main stands for? It represents the main content of the page. So it's a way to say what I'm including in this section is supposed to be like the most important portion of the page. Once again, how do you know which elements do you have and which elements you can use? You should always go and check on the reference, the official reference, and see what do you have and which one is the one that better complies what you are needing to implement. Then the question is, do you have to learn all of that elements by memory? Yes, because in the exam, I will randomly pick one of them, and I will ask you to explain like the element with all of its properties. So now you have to start from now to look at the page, divide like all of the hundreds of elements, and then start studying each one of them. Because one of the questions in the exam is like picking randomly one of them, and you have to be able to explain them, okay? Of course not. Of course not. It doesn't work that way. It's not something you have to learn, but it is something you have to, if you want to use, you go to the reference, you check the reference, and then you can use that, okay? No, of course not. And I hope in the video, it's not necessary to learn all of them, okay? Okay, these are two super important attributes that we will be using always. That will be the ID and the class. They are attributes that we will add to each element. I won't go deep in them because these are the attributes that enable us to add the styling or the CSS to the website. So I would prefer to start from this the next lesson, so that you can automatically see how it works, because it doesn't make so much sense to explain them without showing you how the CSS works. Just the last thing, it is that okay, even if the last thing, and we're finished, okay? even if the content and the way that I structure my content is completely up to me, and I can write the HTML however I want, and that the fact that I write the footer, for instance, I of course wrote the footer at the end of the page. But if I write the footer at the beginning of the page, nothing happens. Technically, it works. But there are some rules, and there are some good practices, and there are some conventions that must be followed. So to check that our site or that the HTML we are building is compliant with those practices, with those, there is this website that is called the HTML or the L03 validator. And it is a website where you can upload the HTML file. In this case, we will upload our site, and it says, or it says us if there is something that is not working, or if there is something that must be fixed. Not working doesn't mean that the page won't display. I mean, technically it works like the one our page works. But in this case, for instance, it says that the character encoding is not being declared. What is the character encoding? Do you know what it is? For instance, if we want to use accents, or if we want to use a specific set of characters, we must declare what is the set of characters that we are expecting to use in the page. So we're missing that. And this validator tells us your page is working, is compliant, but you are missing this. So it's very important, and we will do that later, to always validate that the HTML we are building is compliant with the standards. Okay. Okay. So for now, we can leave it here and see you on Friday.